today's session is going to be quite interactive. We've got some information to share, as well as we've developed a model that we really believe will help leaders to be inclusive. And there's been so many things that are happening around the world, which is kind of highlighting the need for us to be more inclusive leaders. And also one of the things that stands out is just looking at kind of representation in different spheres and different fields, especially around, you know, the idea of climate change and leading in that sphere. And actually, you know, is everybody here that needs to be here? And if not, let's see how we can engage them. And let's see how we can change the kind of landscape of leadership in some of these areas. Really, today's session is about exploring the leadership within your kind of groups or organizations or kind of within yourself, and looking at the key areas that need to change and focusing on bringing that change forward.
Well, as Georgina said, we like to learn, we like to laugh, and we like to have fun, and it's really important to us in BUD. And want to share with you some real interesting research that will help inform us today around why the ROC model will bring transformation, and why, as an organization, BUD have designed this model, and why that helps facilitate inclusive leadership. And so there'll be a slide that'll come up in a moment, and it'll be some research to share with you from a report called Diversity Wins. And this is a report by a group called McKinsey & Company. And in May 2020, McKinsey & Company released a report called Diversity Wins, based on analysis and research that they have carried out. And on the research and analysis they did with various organizations, over 1,000 companies and organizations, and across 15 different nations. So quite a vast, you know, analysis and research. And what they have presented and what they've found for us and shared with us, it's amazing, really, that those organizations who have gender equality in their executive teams or in their leadership team, we could say, they are 25% more likely to outperform those who don't. That's powerful, isn't it? It just shows you the need for that gender equality on leadership and in our organizations and our culture, in organizational cultures. Then going further on a little bit, they also shared with us their findings around ethnic and diversity, in that sense, having different ethnic groups and different people groups on our leadership teams. And what they have shared with us is that they are 36% more likely to outperform, become more profitable, more productive, more innovative than those who don't have those voices heard and those various people involved in the leadership of an organization. Next, I want to share another interesting theory with you. And this is from a Dutch psychologist, an amazing guy called Geert Hofstede. And Geert Hofstede identified 6 cultural dimensions. What is a cultural dimension? I'm glad you asked. Well, you think of culture. Culture is, you know, what we do around here, isn't it? It's our values and our beliefs. It shapes our behavior. And
so we had that question earlier on, which was, what is ROC? What does it stand for? And so basically, we have been doing lots and lots of work with leaders. And inclusive leadership is something that is a kind of a thread that has run throughout the work that we do. So we work with, as mentioned before, leaders for positive change in business and community. But what we've recognized is that there are certain elements which are the core elements that are required for inclusive leadership. And so what it is that we've looked at is these 3 core elements are those that which we believe, through extensive research and looking at the things which are really required to ensure that we can become inclusive, are for us to be able to release, which is really releasing control, ownership, which is really about us understanding ourselves and our own well-being as leaders, especially in times like this. And then you've got the collective intelligence, and that's really where we are able to start to embrace the collective intelligence of the people that are around us and our teams, and not take them for granted in terms of their skills and their knowledge, and how bringing that together brings kind of innovation and shared ownership around the things that we're trying to achieve.
That model highlights to us then, when we measure culture, how those cultural dimensions can translate and affect our organizational culture and our leadership styles. So for example, in the United Kingdom, from a scale of 0 to 100, British organizations and people's, the rate is 89 out of 100. So it's extremely high on the individualism versus collectivism is where we were trying to go to before I got randomly kicked out by the Wi-Fi. So there's this sense of, in our organizations and in our roles as leaders, we have a responsibility to challenge that, that we do not want to be focused on just me, myself, and I, but we want to move from a me mentality and bring in a we mentality, that it's not just about the individual being successful and outperforming others, but it's about the collective. And so it's around this, when we understand those cultural dimensions, it informs us in how then we can shift from an ego system into an ecosystem, moving from a me mentality to a we mentality. And so really what the ROC model then does, it facilitates that process and enables us to transition from a individualism outlook to more of a collective intelligence and a collaborative way of working and operating. And so interestingly, what we have found is when we have talked with organizations and leaders is that when they sit and reflect and look at, confidentially rating their own organizations, their own teams on a scale of 1 to 10, what would they rate their organization's culture in terms of, is it a collective culture? Is it a culture that is collaborative and inclusive, or is it much more an individualistic culture? I just would ask you to invite you to reflect on that for a moment. An interesting thing could be to actually, if you feel okay with this and you feel, that you would like to, share in the chat box out of a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being it's very collective and inclusive, or, 1, it's very individual, very individualistic. Does that make sense? So reflect on that for a moment. This is a taster, but I can just give a brief insight into kind of, there is so much more to learn from this model that Gert Hofstede has come up with, these cultural dimensions. But let me just give you kind of the main headings and a little bit about it, because I know we have a session plan and we're just bringing these elements to you, these things to you to kind of inform you of some of the reasons why we've developed our ROC model. So power distance, really on that cultural dimension, it's about, how power is equally shared or not shared in a culture. So there's a distance between the power. Is it, a top-down culture in our organization, or is it more of a flat? Are we in silos and that kind of thing, and we're just taking orders from an autocratic type of hierarchy, or are we? Is the distance in power more shared and things like that? That would be some of the insights around that one. Individualism versus collectivism, which we've talked about. Masculinity versus femininity is not really about the sexes. It's more about how decisions are made and how individual leaders operate. Are they more task oriented? Are they more nurturing? Are they more caring? Are they more driven by facts and figures? And there's a masculinity and a femininity measurement in how leaders and organizations function. Uncertainty avoidance is more around risk taking. Some cultures and some organizations are more, we don't want to take a risk. We want to avoid any uncertainty. But others, like entrepreneurial people that are pioneering, that are breaking new ground, if you like, they will step out and be more happy with uncertainties and more kind of like proactive around startups and new projects, new programs, and challenging the norms and that kind of thing. Long-term versus short-term orientation. It's more around, some people from certain cultures or some organizational culture is they're more focused on the long-term plan, more of the short term. I think that's self-explanatory. And indulgence versus restraint is more around individuals from a certain culture are more restraint and more balanced. Others are more just seeking pleasure, seeking experiences, overindulging, maybe not conscious of the effects that certain things may have on them and on their team. And then there's this sense of those in certain countries are very legalistic, very strict, very restrained, and they bring that into their team. And so these cultural dimensions then inform us how certain people from certain places may function and how leaders may operate in certain ways. It just provides us with some insights. I hope that helps a little bit to explain the model a bit further. But as I said, it's more of a taster and kind of a bit of an introduction into that. There's so much more we could learn. And I just want to hand over to Georgina again for a second. Thank you, Georgina.
Thanks so much for that, Lee. Trying to kind of cram in so much information in a short space of time, but I really love the fact that there are all of these differences. And one of the things that we looked at actually is that, you know, one of the things that stops sometimes inclusive leadership is that we're scared of what is different. So for us to sort of start to understand our differences and actually look at how we can measure some of those differences and be more aware of what they are, it helps us to relate to others and actually embrace the difference and bring about that collectivism because we're open. So that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. So I've mentioned our kind of model of inclusive leadership. I'll throw it out there just for a few seconds. What does inclusive leadership look like to you? So if we could think of an inclusive leader, what are the kind of attributes that they would have? Somebody that's like a really great inclusive leadership, inclusive leader, what would they look like and what attributes would they have? It's all about values, exclamation mark, empowering, yeah. Open-minded and understanding, well-maintained themselves. They know their capacity, asking questions instead of telling. Fantastic. Consults. Listening as well as talking. Ability to share tasks out, to delegate, listen, hear, consensus, benign dictatorship. Active listening, one of the key things, absolutely. Creative, shared ownership. That's brilliant. And I love that idea of kind of asking the questions rather than just saying what you think the solution is. Celebrates achievements, absolutely. Open-minded, celebrate and recognize achievements of all. Not the only one with ideas, absolutely. Some really good insights there. Flexibility, question self, active listening, yes. Fluid, flexibility, courages, the courage to try different things, perspective, sense of faith, interesting, yeah, humble, brilliant. Yeah, this is like the perfect person, right? Things that we all aspire to be. I think one of the key things is that the reason why we created this model is because we found that there were so many organizations that were looking to be inclusive, but they just weren't sure how to. So the desire was there, but they didn't have access to something that was really quite simple and easy to access to enable them to just think about that inclusivity and to have a kind of a framework and a model that you can measure yourself against and think, actually, am I releasing control? Am I taking ownership of myself and my own kind of unconscious bias? Am I aware of what's around me and my own kind of feelings and my own needs? And also, am I embracing that collective intelligence? So you'd always have these kind of 3 points to continue to navigate around and anchor yourself to, because we're only human, and so we can't always be perfect. Raise your hand if you're perfect. but really, it's just about having a tool. And so we're going to dig even a bit deeper into this. And I love the extra things in there. Spirit of inquiry, yeah, always being curious, being confident, problem solving rather than problem seeking, absolutely. Consciously reaching out beyond the immediate cohort to involve others, yeah, thinking about the needs that are there and just recognizing that you don't have to know everything or be able to do everything, but actually there are so many people with skills, talents and desire to be part of what you are. So yeah, so let's move on to release, and I'll let Lee take over.
Thank you so much, Georgina. Some really amazing comments there. And what we recognize that the first important element to becoming more of an inclusive leader and to lead better is release. Interesting study, you'll see the slide. An Institute for Corporate Productivity, the study with 1,100 companies, they found that companies that promoted collaborative working were 5 times more likely to be high performing. So it's so vital for the high level of performance and productivity to emerge, and it's so important to release. But what is the release? We're going to come to that now. And release is really about what I need to let go of, what I as a leader, what you as a leader or as a team member need to release control of. And there's a lovely quote that we're going to share with you on the next slide from a significant leader called Craig Groeschel. And he says this, listen to this quote: "You can have control, you can have growth, but you can't have both." And just let that rest for a moment in your mind. You can have control, you can have growth, but you can't have both. Very interesting quote. And really and truly, when we talk about the release, it's about allowing others to emerge in our organization, within our leadership teams. And so when we talk about releasing control, is it that we need to release others? We need to make space, take a risk on people, allow them more responsibility. It could be, as a leader, I need to release responsibility to another member of the team, to allow them to shine, to allow them to come forth. It could be, I need to release a know-it-all attitude. It could be thought patterns, it could be old ways, old systems, old ways of thinking. I might need to release unconscious bias, address those and kind of be aware of those and release some of those things. And so really what I want to invite you to do is, considering that, is to think about maybe 3 main things that as a leader or as an individual team member that you need to release control of to become more inclusive. And I invite you to take a pen and paper and to reflect for a minute and to write down kind of 3 main things that you feel that you would need to release to enable growth for you and in your organization. I'll just give you a minute to do that. Thank you for participating in advance. What do I need to let go of? 3 main things. I'll just give you 30 more seconds. Okay, thank you so much for doing that. And so really and truly, we want to make this practical. We like to embed, get people to really consider next steps, and really be transformational. So we don't want this just to be all theory. We want you to think about tangible steps, action that you can take in terms of becoming more inclusive and a better leader, and around this element of our model release.
And that leads me quite nicely onto the O element, which is really about taking ownership of ourselves. Really interesting. So we did a session with some managers from Specsavers. We did a program, and one of the sessions, as a result of some of the workshops that we did, a manager had been there for 20 years, and I know, it's Specsavers, so it's not the exact sort of thing that we're involved in, but even in our work, we could be in leadership for years upon years. And it was so interesting that he said for the first time, he had the ability to understand himself in his leadership. For the very first time in all of his years in being in leadership. And what we found is that there are so many individuals that are talented, want to create change, want to do something, and are kind of catapulted into this space of leadership, but they don't necessarily have those tools that they need, as well as that moment to kind of just evaluate who they are, and what's important to them and what their own personal needs are. And this again is this place of being vulnerable. And I think, we have to, in order for us to successfully lead others, we need to be able to lead ourselves, and we need to have that space. We think it's absolutely essential to be able to carve out that time and allow ourselves the kind of freedom to recognize that we're also important in this space. And so that involves, what are our needs, but also in being inclusive. Maybe we've got some, we all have unconscious biases. And so, you know, have we had the space and the time to really uncover what some of those things are? What are some of our assumptions that we've made about particular groups of people or types of people, or who do we even see as leaders? You know, have we created a stereotype of who we think you know, holds all the answers in the leadership that within our organizations or the people around us? And so it's this kind of confronting ourselves, but also taking ownership of where we are, who we are, and actually what our needs are in this space. And this is a statistic which is really quite scary. I mean, in British adults in employment, 79% commonly experience work-related stress. And this is something which, you know, has really sadly become a theme, that there's so, you know, people who experience so much stress in their work, especially when you're trying to create positive change. You know, you get so caught up in wanting to create the change that actually sometimes we neglect ourselves. And so we want to disrupt this. You know, we want to make sure that we are putting ourselves first, and that we actually have that moment to really evaluate who we are and what we need, and to model this, you know, as leaders. You know, if we're getting to the point where we're burnt out all the time, then how can we expect our team members to look after themselves? So we need to first model this ownership around our well-being and our own mental health, to ensure that we're modeling something that is accessible for others. So yeah, so I'm going to take us through a little exercise, but you might want to make any comments, feel free. But now what I'd like for us to do is to take a moment to really reflect on our own well-being, specifically in this space, and to think about that. So I'm going to invite you to turn your camera off for a moment, just as I take you through an exercise, and I will turn mine off as well. Thank you for sharing that, Lee. I muted myself instead. Okay, so let's just start by taking some deep breaths. So just take in some deep breaths. Just concentrate on the breath and on your breathing. And just let all the distractions, everything else go, anything that you've been thinking about. And now I'm going to invite you to reflect on your well-being. Are you at the place where you need to be for your optimal well-being? How are you looking after your own well-being? And just take some deep breaths as you reflect. And I want you to go back to some of those questions, but I want you to think about your well-being in particular. What do I need to let go of? And what is it that needs to come for me to look after myself and my well-being? What do I need to let go of? And what needs to come? So just breathe out what you need to let go of, and breathe in what needs to come. And now I'm going to invite you to actually write down one commitment that you're going to make today to yourself and with us together. What's the change that you're going to make? And make sure that it's realistic. It could just be one commitment. What are you able to do? And what's the commitment that you're going to make towards looking after your own well-being? I'm going to ask you to write that down, and then we're going to share it on our screens.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgina. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And this sense of taking ownership of our own well-being is so important. And one of the things is about role modeling resilience as well. When we build that resilience into our lives, that as leaders, then we have an opportunity to role model that out in our teams and in our organizations. And so, yeah, taking that ownership, it always reminds me of when you're on the airplane. I know not many of us are going to be in planes probably for a while due to the pandemic, but it reminds me of being on the airplane when they do the kind of health and safety and they talk about, adjust your own mask and make sure you're breathing first before you try to help anyone else. It's that sense of self-care, taking ownership of our self-care. And the next element in our ROC model is the C, which is collective intelligence. And really, again, it's about in our leadership and in our organizations, making sure that we value the voices and looking at how to value the voices in our organization, in our team, moving again from this me culture into a we culture. And really, it's about that transition from an ego system to an ecosystem. And there's going to be a quote that's going to come up on the slide in a moment as well that I really love by a lady called Verna Mayers. And she said this: diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. So really, it's about, making sure everyone can enjoy the music and dance, that everyone's participating. And a sense of, we may have different types of people in the room, but are they really included? Are they being heard, and are they dancing? And so really what the ROC model addresses in this is this collective intelligence and really harvesting and gleaning from everyone. And that's what we seek to empower leaders and organizations to do. So when you think of this collective intelligence and this quote to kind of help us kind of illustrate it a bit, I want you to think about for a moment and reflect, how diverse is my leadership? How diverse is the leadership within our organization and the organizations with which you work with? And then how can you include all the voices in the team? Are all the voices being valued equally, and are they being heard? And how can I include them in the team? Just to reflect and to think about that for a moment. And so really it's about, am I fully equipped to bring together, the skills and the talents of my team? And am I equipped as a leader to bring those people together and to allow innovation and productivity? Are we really tapping into the collective intelligence that is there? And are the people being invited into the room, but are they actually being allowed to dance? Yes, the questions are there in the chat box for you also. How diverse is the leadership within your organization? Or how am I myself? Because not everyone's representing an organization, we understand that. So myself, how diverse is my leadership in that sense? And how can you include the voices in the team? And am I equipped with the tools that I need, to be able to harvest the collective intelligence within the organization? So as you reflect on that and think about that, we're going to invite you guys again into a breakout room and space in a minute or two. But we really want to encourage this transitional process, this transformational process with this model. And again, we're just introducing this element to you. We're not going through the whole process, but it's really about this moving from an ego system to an ecosystem. There's some examples on the slide on the screen of some of the things that you may need to be more equipped. Have a look at that for a moment. It could be some coaching, better tools, new models. I need to be further educated and trained. I might need facilitating, or our team might need facilitated through a process of change, learning new listening skills, active listening, understanding others, and valuing others more. So these are some of the examples to consider. We want to invite you to consider and reflect and answer this question. What do I need / we, what do we need to focus on? And what's the first step we need to take to move into more of an ecosystem, to transition into that ecosystem and to be more inclusive, to bring more inclusive leadership in? What do we need to focus on? What's the first step we need to take to become more of an ecosystem and to bring more inclusive leadership in?
one of the things that was standing out to me in the group that I was in was really about this need to understand others, people that aren't, you know, the same as us, and to create spaces and build confidence around, I guess, the permission to be able to participate, and actually what that looks like, and making things more accessible in many ways. And for example, even in some of the work that we do in BUD, we literally change the whole language and the way that people access certain programs to fit different groups. So it's very, very interesting. And that kind of, I'll tell you a little bit about what we do actually in BUD as well, which is really about, it sounds very simple, but it isn't. Really what we do is support organizations and groups to go through the process of change. And that might look like, you know, for one of the things that we've done is looked at actually how can we bring those who aren't always at the table, the loudest voices, how can we bring them into the conversation? And we've done a variety of things, but a lot of it starts from listening. So sort of identifying, as was mentioned before, like identifying the things, the key things that are missing, and making, allowing our team to be aware that we need to do something different in the first place. And then it's kind of uncovering what that needs to be. And we started to get into it a little bit today, but the work that we do in BUD is really about uncovering that even further and going deeper, but not just trying to think about what the issues are, but also to find the solutions and create a system of change, really. And these are just some of the things that we do in terms of some of the work around inclusive leadership. And so, yeah, so we would just invite you, we're happy to have a conversation, have a one-to-one chat. So yeah, so if there's anything that you think that we could support you in, again, for us, our mission is to support as many leaders as we possibly can to change the landscape of leadership. So we're always about making things accessible. So we'd be really open to having conversations with you around the leadership within your groups, or even yourself internally, in terms of what you might want to see change. Thank you. Really, really appreciate your time, and also your openness to dig deeper and maybe dive a bit deeper than you had expected for an afternoon on a Tuesday. But yes, likewise, thank you so much, David, for your input, and thank you for having us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Anything you wanted to say, Lee?
No, just thank you so much. It was really inspiring, and really, you know, when we facilitate, when BUD as an organization interact with groups like yourselves, it really inspires us, and we're always learning and being challenged ourselves. So thank you so much, everyone who participated. Really appreciate the time that you gave to this session. Thank you.